Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Helen Murphy and I work for Byte Software Services and I look after the relationship with Mimecast. Just before I hand over to Steve to start his presentation, I just wanted to go through a bit about the Bytes and Mimecast partnership. So Bytes have been a Mimecast partner for over 5 years now. We have the highest level of partner status afforded to Mimecast partners, and that's based on our revenue and customer base and also our sales and technical expertise. We were actually awarded Growth Partner of the Year in 2014 and have a strong relationship across the board. We use the Mimecast service ourselves and have in-house sales and technical expertise also. And we have some very happy customers across all industries, including legal, insurance, retail and the public sector, and more. So the reason for today's webinar is that a lot of our customers are thinking about moving to Office 365, and some have already made the move. Bytes and Mimecast can help you make the move from ensuring a streamlined migration and 100% email uptime. So thanks again for joining. I'll now pass over to Steve, who will begin the presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Helen. It's great to be invited to join you on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. I've got some slides to show you, and what I'll also do is I'm going to demonstrate the end user experience, and I'll also show a little bit of the back-end experience, or the administrator experience as well. So my email address, if you've got questions, please include the team from Bytes on the emails as well. But I'm slam@mimecast.com, and my role is I'm an enterprise solutions architect. So what that means is I look after pre-sales opportunities for customers or prospects who've got more than 10,000 seats. It's important to know that Mimecast have got some very small customers and some very large customers and pretty much everything in between. So we've got about 13,000 customers now. We've been going since 2003. And what we do is cloud-based email security, archiving, and continuity. The mission back in 2003 was to really reduce the complexity that most organizations face around email, particularly around what we often term hygiene, so antivirus, anti-spam, and for some organizations, data leak or data loss prevention, and then other capabilities too that typically go around email. Move as many of those as possible to the cloud. Now, given that we started in 2003, that was quite an unusual perspective because clearly most of our rivals, pretty much all the rivals back then, were on-premises solutions, sometimes appliances. I guess message labs would be a good exception to that, but most rival technologies required lots of different points of management and not much integration. So we've been going for quite a long time. We're more than 500 people now. We can guarantee data residency in the US, the UK, what we term offshore, so that's the Channel Islands in the UK, South Africa, and soon Australia as well. Now, of course, when we're talking 365, data residency is perhaps less relevant, but our background has been very much Exchange on premises, and obviously some customers have hosted Exchange as well, so our partner stands up Exchange for them. We have customers in quite different scenarios as well, so you can imagine some have got very technical users, some have got completely non-technical users. Some have got local administrators, some are purely a managed service. Revenue is annual, so customers who sign up, they sign up on a per user per year basis, and they then renew every year. Our retention rate is really good, so 97%, and the main reason for that, I believe, is that we've got a team of people who are not on commission, who as soon as a customer signs up with Mimecast, they then help them get the most value from the service they bought. Other stats here that are interesting, probably the most useful one on the screen is the 25 petabytes. So we have ingested a huge amount of customer data, and that's email data, so typically from enterprise vault systems and other on-premises archives. So we continue to grow that. Hopefully what you pick up from the slide is we're a safe pair of hands. We've had one outage in the last 11.5 years. That was for 4 hours. And we've done everything we can to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So that's both in our architecture, it's in our processes, and it's in the way that we operate those systems. Obviously, we could have another outage, but our uptime SLA is 100%, and we do all we can to make sure that that doesn't come into play. Contrast that to Office 365. Understand the SLA there is 99.99%, which for many customers is great. but some customers choose Mimecast purely to provide continuity for that other small percentage, because clearly that can be several minutes a month. So definitely one to be aware of. But again, some customers it's not important. So our areas of capability are split into 3 areas, as I mentioned earlier: security, archiving, and continuity. Because it's all built on one platform, something that we built in-house, all of our technology is integrated. It's all one management console. You can create policies which operate across security and archiving, for example. So you could do something such as, many customers currently are worried about spear phishing. So when email has been sent inbound, or a series of emails have been sent inbound, which are using information about perhaps your company, information about the person they're targeting. Maybe the message appears to come from your head of finance, for example. So what happens in that scenario? Obviously, we have a technology which will help address that. So we have something called targeted threat protection. And what it does is it automatically rewrites URLs that are present in emails, rewrites them to point to our cloud, so that the point that the user clicks on those links, we make sure they're still safe destinations. Now, the reason I mentioned that in that context is, imagine you've had messages that have come into your environment, they've gone into the archive, and say a year, 2 years, even more down the line, a user opens one of those messages. It could have had a phishing destination in it. Now, lots of enterprise phishing solutions are pretty good at dealing with messages coming into the organization and assessing are those destinations safe. But what they're not generally good at is dealing with after the point in time they've been received by the email server. So again, my archiving example comes into play here. So because we rewrite the URL, it's at the point the user clicks on the link in the message that they're protected, because we then check to make sure it's still safe. Equally, if they're running on an unmanaged device, let's say it's an iPhone, an Android device, a Windows phone, or a BlackBerry phone, or tablets of those platforms, again, we're protecting them and making sure, even if it's an unmanaged device that's owned by the individual, they're protected. So I talked a little bit about unification. The only technology we have in our stack that's not built by Mimecast is the antivirus engines. So we use 3 antivirus engines. They're leading commercial AV engines. And the reason we don't publish the names is simply because we have the right to change them over time. So we look for the most effective AV engines at a point in time. But they're typically your brand-leading Sophos, McAfee, those kinds of things. The main reason customers choose Mimecast is because of the 100% uptime SLA. Customers who are interested in archiving like the fact that our archive is perpetual. So for as long as a customer is paying a license to Mimecast, we'll keep their data. They can, of course, extract the data from us if they were to choose another platform. Not something else they really like is it's immutable. So end users can't delete content from the archive. That means you've always got a record of exactly what was sent. It's tamper-proof, so it would take 2 administrators to make changes that resulted in content being deleted. One administrator would make the change, or request the change to be made, and the second administrator would approve it. All activities carried out by administrators are audited. So if you give let's think of an archiving type scenario. Imagine you've got a compliance and legal team, perhaps, that needs to be able to deal with investigatory cases, and they want to be able to look at users' emails, somebody who's being investigated, for example. So in that scenario, you'd grant those users extra rights within Mimecast so that they're able to look at the other users' messages, but then we'll audit exactly which of those users' messages they opened and when, so you can tell if anyone's abusing that capability. Another one of the tenets is useful to users. So it's all very well often having a compliance need for something like archiving or security, or a business need for continuity, but we believe very strongly that given that there's an investment required to get those capabilities, whether you do them natively in 365, you do them with third-party technologies on premises, or Mimecast on premises or for 365, we believe that useful to users is important as well. So that brings us on to the last one, really, which is we have a plugin for Outlook. It's optional. Many customers choose to use it, but you don't have to. And that essentially enables users to stay in email, and yet they can do the things I mentioned, but they can also do things like send encrypted emails, They can send large file attachments and request people to send them large file attachments that are bigger than you can send in the native email service. So we can send up to 2 gigabytes email attachments, and essentially they're routed directly through the Mimecast service. If we just look at another few slides about background, and then I'll show you how some of this works from a user experience. So, classic scenario. Remember back in the old days, those of you who are as old as me or probably older, I'm guessing there might be a few of you who are listening to this. Back in the day, you put a mail server in, and probably didn't need to put antivirus, anti-spam, probably didn't need DLP, probably didn't worry too much about archiving, probably didn't worry about off-site backups for email, although actually the latter probably more likely that you did. What most customers ended up with was lots of ancillary services going with their Exchange environment. And while they mitigated the business risks that were important, they brought in complexity, cost, extra points of management, and things that you wouldn't ideally have, but they were just necessary. So we can group these into outbound security services, inbound attack protection, disaster recovery sites with off-site backups, archiving and e-discovery. But when you move to the cloud, many of the things disappear into the cloud, so you get the benefits of less complexity. I stood up an Office 365 infrastructure. I guess that sounds almost distracting, isn't it? Because of course it's just cloud. But I came up with a domain name, took out a 365 subscription, and had the whole thing up and running, all provisioned in 365 in less than 30 minutes. And that's quite common. I'm not saying a business necessarily would do that. They'd probably have more process involved. But it's pretty easy these days to get the basic things up and running. But what do you not get out of the box? Well, the things that people often need, they need things like, how do I deal with what we term the threats of the day? So in this case in point, this would be spear phishing. So 365 or Microsoft have publicly stated they're going to add spear phishing protection to 365, but it's not there right now. So what do you do right now? Solutions like Mimecast are often the answer. We're extending our capabilities as well, so we focus very much on not just being a good partner of Microsoft. We're a gold partner, and we're also, as we understand, the only managed ISV for Office 365. But we work as closely as possible to make sure that we continue to add value. So around spear phishing, for example, I mentioned we rewrite URLs to give protection, but we're also in the process of engineering, adding in where's it gone? They're bringing in sandboxing. That's the word. So essentially, we're doing this differently to our rivals, though, because what's going to happen is our whole architecture is based around not having latency. So what we want to do instead is we want to make sure users get messages as quickly as possible. We obviously do the security and compliance that you'd expect, but then around spear phishing, we also bring in, when we bring the sandboxing in, we'll send a read-only version of the message immediately, and then we'll do the sandboxing, so basically open up the content, open up the attachments, make sure that there's no macro viruses or anything dangerous in there, then send them on to the user just a few minutes later. So that's quite different to a lot of the leading rivals, where they'll typically bring in a delay of several minutes before the user gets to see the message at all. So very much trying to make sure that we're useful to users. A little bit about data integrity. So the archiving in 365 is good. I know recently there's been an announcement to extend it further. So one of the concerns users or customers often had was information from the deleted items folder would get purged, I think, after 15 or 30 days. And there was an announcement recently from Microsoft that that's going to be, that restriction is being removed. So they'll say perpetually. But something that's still different to Mimecast is users can choose to purge their deleted items folder. So imagine you had a user who's malicious in the organization and trying to cover their tracks. It's only at the point that you choose to apply legal hold that you'd then be able to make sure you had all the messages. With Mimecast, we'll keep all the messages permanently unless you had a policy to the contrary. So customers want to go cloud, they want to reduce complexity and cost, they still need many of the things I mentioned, and Mimecast comes in as effectively a sister service to 365. So we've used 365 as the primary email service for the customer, Equally, we work very similar for Exchange if customers currently on premises, maybe moving to 365, or of course some customers would choose just to stay on premises for different reasons. So essentially what happens is the external email comes to Mimecast first, we then forward it on to 365 into EOP, and then it gets relayed to the user's mailbox. And then the same route backwards the other way. So 365 would be configured to point to Mimecast, and then Mimecast would send the messages externally. Mimecast has other capabilities I've not mentioned, and I don't want to bore you with the details, but just to give you a couple of ideas. Imagine you had a merger or an acquisition in your business, where you might want from a point in time to be able to present a unified email domain externally. So we can, by policy, and you could configure this as an administrator, we can automatically rewrite the email URLs for all messages outbound such that they appear to come from whatever brand you choose. Obviously a brand you own the rights to, but so that's really powerful. We can also do things like email stationery. Because we see all messages inbound and outbound, we can, through policy, automatically apply whatever branding you like to the bottom of the emails. We can pull out attributes from Active Directory if you've chosen to integrate that way too. I think I've mentioned most of the other items here. Probably the one I haven't talked about is routing. So again, we can do some quite sophisticated routing, deciding where to send messages inbound and outbound. This can be useful for multinationals quite often where they need to send US emails out through US points of presence due to regulatory reasons for some US departments and such like. We can do that really easily. So if we look under the hood of how this works on a little bit more technical level, I appreciate some of you are probably very technical and some less so, but I just want to explain to those who are a little bit more technical just quickly how this works in a bit more detail, and then I'll go back to a slightly higher level. So what happens is, as I mentioned, customer MX records point to us. We then see the messages, we do the email checks I've mentioned, antivirus, anti-spam, DLP, anything else you've configured that we're able to do. We then forward the message on to the primary email service, so that could be Exchange, could be 365, could be Domino. We're pretty agnostic as to what the mail service is. We add value around things like 365 because in addition to what I've spoken about, we also have features to do things like integrate with Active Directory and Azure. So we add more features for 365, but the basic engine is the same. We can also have end users accessing in a number of different ways. So I spoke about the plugin for Outlook, but equally there are native apps for Android, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, and iPhone, and of course that works on the tablet equivalents of those platforms as well. Equally, we've got it's not shown in the diagram, but we've got a web portal as well. So a little bit like Outlook Web Access, it looks pretty similar. It's also available during an outage. So imagine if you've got a planned or an unplanned outage of your primary email service. Maybe if you're using Exchange on premises, maybe you're doing an upgrade, or you've had a piece of hardware fail, or some kind of change like that. Or maybe 365 has an outage. Then in that scenario, for a customer who's licensed for a continuity service, we route the traffic directly to everything that's accessible that I've mentioned. So we'd send it straight to the Outlook plugin, so users just continue to work and wouldn't need to even know there's an outage. And that works for inbound and outbound messages. We also enable the Mimecast apps for the platforms I've mentioned, all the mobile devices, and for the web portal. It can all send and receive live email even if the primary service is down. When the primary service comes back up, we then synchronize all the changes on the back end, so there's a continuous record. The other item you might see on the slide here is journal ingestion. So we can not only ingest legacy email archives from things like Enterprise Vault, if they're extracted into EML or PST format, but also we can ingest internal messages as well. So that's what the journal ingestion is for. So we get a full record of every message sent internally and externally. One item, actually, if I just go back to the slide that I mentioned but isn't shown on the slide, is we can optionally integrate with your directory as well. So if you've got Active Directory on premises or Active Directory in Azure, we can integrate with that. And there's several benefits to that, but the primary benefit to that is we are able to, or you as an administrator of Mimecast, if you have a service, can create policies that target particular groups of users. You can also target particular attributes as well. So you could create policies that, for example, apply to everybody in a particular role in a particular location in your organization, if that made sense. If we look at the next level down, and I promise I won't go more technical than this for this call, but if you've got questions or like to explore in more detail, we can certainly do that another time. So inside, if I just step back a slide, the items that are shown in the cloud there with the Mimecast are represented on this block diagram. Now, everything on the block diagram happens in 2 data centers. It's mirrored in 2 data centers in real time. So we're architected from such a perspective that if we were to lose an entire geography of data centers, we've got enough spare capacity that we could continue to serve users seamlessly. The reason I haven't shown everything twice is just it makes the diagram more complex. So the messages come in at the top, they hit our processing layer, we perform the standard mail transfer agent functionality. We then do security and reputation checks. So we take into account things like users in your organization, people that they've sent outbound messages to. We store the, it's policy-based, but we store the email addresses of messages sent outbound, and we then view those as more trustworthy than addresses that haven't been sent to by people internally, and therefore optionally we can apply fewer checks to those. We then hand through into our scanning layer, so we do lots of policy checks including DLP. We send through 3 different antivirus engines in parallel. We do anti-spam. We then have our own heuristic adaptive threat protection, which we call Sahara. We then also do image scanning as well, so blocking out pornographic images and such like. Unless, of course, you've got an exceptional policy in there which says maybe you've got images, often of buildings. Many of our rivals, they somehow view buildings as looking like flesh tones, so there can be issues there. So you can put overrides in, but we're pretty good at that out of the box. Then for customers who are licensed for archiving and have got policies set for archiving, we then archive everything. We store in triplicate. It's time-stamped. It's legally provable receipt and delivery as well. And the benefit of that is we have had customers use our evidence in courts of law for legal cases, proving things like they've submitted tenders within deadlines and such like. So I mentioned before we extend the capabilities of 365. We're a good partner of Microsoft, and we extend rather than replace what they do. These slides will be available afterwards for reference, I'm sure. But the core ones are things like the 100% uptime SLA, sending large file attachments up to 2 gigabytes, the ability to make sure that users aren't deleting messages. They can delete them from their Outlook experience, but they're still stored on the back end. And then adding extra capabilities for things like spear phishing protection and ensuring that messages are encrypted. So this is probably a good time. I'm going to step out of the slides because I'll just click through the next couple, but they're just customer examples that you can read afterwards if it's interesting. So I've got 3 of those, and they're just examples that I gave around large files and continuity and such like. So I'll just click through those just for a moment. Okay, so that's the last slide. As I say, if there's questions, by all means, feel free to mail me and mail colleagues at Bytes. Don't hang up yet. I know this is a recorded session you're listening to, but now what I'll do is I'm going to show you the user experience, and then we'll look at the back end as well. So I am sharing my live desktop. Apologies if I get any pop-ups that come up that are distracting. Shouldn't do, but of course you never know with these things. I think it's more interesting showing a live environment. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into Outlook. Now this is Outlook 2013. It happens to be connected to a number of different mail providers, so one of which is 365. This one's currently connected. The account I'm about to demonstrate from is connected to an on-premises Exchange infrastructure, but as I say, we're pretty agnostic as to what we're sending from and to. So what I did was I went to New Message. Now, remember before I said there's a couple of different ways that you can administer Mimecast. So one of them is to give users choices, and in that scenario we could do the following. So I'm going to send a message to my demo user, actually personal account, which is Steve at Geeky and Good. I was going to start a blog and never quite got around to it, but I got the domain name, and in fact this is the 365 infrastructure I mentioned earlier. Now if I was a technical user, what I could do is I could go to the Mimecast tab. I could then choose to do things like click Send Secure, pick something which most users wouldn't know what it was quite rightly, closed circuit message. which essentially means I want to ensure that this message is encrypted. Now that's okay, but as I've mentioned already, quite a lot of users wouldn't want to do that, wouldn't know what that was. So more commonly what we'd do is instead we'd have a policy on the back end, and I'll show you that briefly when we go into the admin console. When I say about encrypted, incidentally, what I mean is mail servers typically can do transport layer security. They need to have a certificate installed and configured appropriately to do so. So most mail servers should be set that way. So you could have a policy that says, ensure that transport layer security is used if it's available, but if it's not, you could choose to either not send the message, which probably isn't the best experience, or you could choose to fall back to our proprietary technology. Now the outgoing version of that is called closed circuit messaging. We've just released a new version which is called secure messaging, which is essentially the next generation of that technology. It's more flexible, better experience on the mobile device, but same premise. And essentially what we do is, well, in fact, I can show, it's probably better to show you the experience. So I send a test message, say that I want to use closed circuit messaging. Now, the content of a message isn't meant to be nonsense, but just for the ease of use here for the demo. And then I'll go to my live inbox from my demo account, from my personal account, give it a few moments to come through. Now, while that's happening, I'd said there's another way to do this, and the other way to do it would be instead of asking the user to know to click on the button in the Mimecast tab, what most customers do in this scenario is they simply set up a policy which says if you see particular keywords in the subject line or a particular destination in the email address, then automatically apply the policy that I've just done manually. That's generally a much better way to go, but obviously it varies. So it can take a few moments for this message to go through, because what's happening is the content is being uploaded to Mimecast. It's going through the normal Exchange server for the notification, and then as an end user, as it's just popped up, I've got a message from the Mimecast service. Let me just open this. I will download the pictures. This is the full experience, and this is the user experience of the receiving user. And what it says is simply click on the link. If I've used the service before, already have a password for the service. If not, I'd be sent one out of band. You can change the experience and the text and the graphics that I've just seen, and now log in to the service using the password that I've got. Okay, it helps if I enter the right password. Now in this case, we've got domain authentication, he says. Let me just see. Interesting. Okay, so I wasn't planning to do this with my live system, but I need to reset the password that I've got for this user, which is easy to do. I'm not going to show it because it's distracting to the demo, but essentially reset the password. I then get logged onto the personal portal, and away I go, and then able to view the message. Let me just give that one more go, actually, because I think I know what my password was. No, okay, so I'd need to reset that, but it's pretty straightforward to do. Now, obviously, an external recipient typically wouldn't have domain authentication to your infrastructure. They'd be using what we call a cloud password, which is a static password, and that's what they'd receive an email. Let me also just show you another scenario. So let's imagine I want to send a large file. Now, what I'm going to do is let's send this from my Mimecast Live account. Again, I send it to the same destination. Here is the video. I'm never good at talking and typing. I should probably stop trying to do so. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to attach a file. I'm going to go to videos. I'm going to go to, I play around with an AR drone. So the file that I was sending there is multi-megabytes, but what's happening based on policy automatically is the attachment itself is not being sent through the primary email service. Instead, it's going to be uploaded to Mimecast automatically, and 341 bytes are being sent through the email service. So I can put whatever text I like in here as well. I can hit send. I can choose whether the user gets to view these options or not, but essentially what I'm saying here is how long can the recipient view the messages. Notify me when the receiving users open the message as well, which can be quite useful. I can also click a tab here and say, allow recipients to send me large files. Now this is quite good because they don't need to be licensed for Mimecast. There's no cost to my organization as a customer for them to do this. It simply needs the sending user to be licensed for Mimecast. So I hit send and that message is on its way. Now just to prove that there's nothing up my sleeves, a classic scenario, if I go to videos and I go to drone, this was the file that I just sent. If we look at properties, it's not that big, this one's 17 meg, but it could have been anything up to 2 gigabytes. So nice and easy. Personally, I prefer that approach to the other way of doing it, which would have been go to the Mimecast tab and then say attach a large file. I get exactly the same result. This is just, I think, more complex for the user. So you've got choices there. You can see I've had a notification toast here at the bottom of the screen, which says the message has been sent. If I go back into my Mimecast inbox, I will see I got a copy of the file as well. If I just download the pictures here. So I've been invited to go and look at the content, is what it's saying, and they'll upload the content. And then here I can see the message that was sent, because I also have a copy of it. That was one of the default options. If I open the attachment, what I see is a message like this. So download the pictures, and now I simply just click on the link, and that content will be downloaded for me automatically. If I haven't used the service, I'll get an access key, so I just click on the button here, and then I'll receive an email with an access key. I then log on and then download the content. So nice and easy. I think it's a nice and good user experience. Let me just show you one other thing. So if I go to the archive, you see I've got the Mimecast tab here. I click on View My Archive, and now I can see every message that I sent. I can do a search. So this could search my inbox going back as far as my inbox goes. So we have an SLA which enables you to just continue to extend this. We've also got some really good searching here. So I can say, for example, pick out any spreadsheets sent to me from a particular user. So let's just put a name in here. So I put J. Miles, which is a colleague of mine. I can be really granular as to what I search for, and we've got an SLA of sub 7-second responses. And that's if you're searching from the plugin, or from the personal portal, or from a mobile device. So again, really good, useful user experience. What I'm going to do now, I don't want to spend too long on the demos, because I appreciate you've probably got other things you need to do as well. Of course, the recording you can fast forward. What I'm going to do now is I'll show you the back end. So if I go to mimecast.com, go to login. Now I could view the personal portal. Let's imagine there was an outage to the primary system. Maybe I'm accessing, maybe it's a snow day. I couldn't get to the office, didn't take my corporate machine with me, have an urgent need for email. Then I could log on using this route potentially. I'd use domain-based authentication if you've chosen to integrate that way. Equally, we've got support for things like SAML2, ADFS. So there's lots of other ways to do the authentication seamlessly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to the European data center. I'm going to log in. So just give me a moment here. This is my different demo environment. Okay. Now I could log in with what we term a cloud password here for administrators as well. I don't normally do that, but the reason it's there is imagine a worst-case scenario that your Active Directory infrastructure is down, everything's down, you still want to get into Mimecast, maybe configure continuity, for example. So that's the case where you'd use a cloud password typically. So I'm just going to use my domain password, logging in. And then what we see is the Mimecast administration console. So this is what we term a dashboard. Now it's a demo environment, so hence not much email flow. But I can see my LDAP connection, secure LDAP to the directory is active. Journaling's all running. Seems to be something wrong with my Exchange environment, so I might want to have a look at that. I can do anything to do with everything we've spoken about, really, I can configure here. So let's go to a specific example. So I'm going to go to Policies. Do you remember that I spoke earlier on about the ability to set a policy to ensure content is encrypted but we want to make sure that it only triggers on particular keywords instead of requiring the user to choose to use this. So what happens is, if I click anywhere except for the definitions button on any of these policy items, I get a screen like this, which is showing the existing policy definitions. If I click on New Policy, I get a screen, as you can see here. Again, this is the same for all the policies that I could set up. And what this is saying is, which users should the policy apply to? So I can be very specific about my scope. And then I link it to a particular policy definition, which is what the definition button did. So I can base this on which network it came from. I can base it on time and date ranges, source destination addresses. I can create groups of users, not just an Active Directory, but let's imagine maybe you've chosen not to use AD integration. I can create groups in Mimecast as well and apply to those. So if I just go back, so this is the same for all policies. Let's go into more detail on the example that we were talking about, or I was talking about. I go to definitions. I now create a new content definition. So at this point, it's specific to the policy facet we're interested in. So in this case, I'm saying look for particular content in the message and then decide what to do. So I could build up a policy for content examination based on a search term, a regular expression, an MD5 hash. So you could choose to say a file or a series of files simply can't leave your organization without an administrator being involved. A reference dictionary. So here we could be looking for inappropriate words. Mimecast keeps dictionaries of these things. You can create your own if you wish. Let's create a really simple example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it an activation score. Now this is probably the most complex kind of policy definition you can do, the area I'm looking at. So most of them are a case of turn things on, turn things off. I'm showing you this one because I think it gives an idea of the power. But if you're not technical and you think this looks hard, other policy examples are much easier. Just turn things on, turn them off typically. So here I could say the words that I care about. So strictly confidential would be an example. I could put that in quotes. I could put other items in here. And then I could assign a score for each of the items in the list. And when the score hits the number I've given above, 10 in this case, then the policy would trigger. So you might choose that you want to take points off for other things being present. We can then choose, is it case sensitive, is it multiple words, are we looking in the subject line, the body, the header. Once we've figured those things out, we can then decide what to do. So the action in the example I gave you before, rather than just holding, deleting, or bouncing, what we chose instead was, or the example I gave was, let's force transport layer security, and if it's not possible, maybe the receiving EMR server doesn't have TLS configured properly, then we can fall back to our proprietary technology. And that's essentially the scenario that I gave. I would then just save this. There's other options I've not mentioned to add to the power of it, and away we go. Now for balance, let me just exit from this one. Just go back to the policy screen. Let me show you a much easier one. So there's some really simple things we could do. We could choose, for example, to, let's think about what's interesting. Let's do domain name services authentication. Let's say that's important to us, we want to do it. So here we define the scope. And then, bear with me, sorry. If I go to the definition button, I then simply say, a new policy, do we want to verify using SPF, DMARC, DKIM? Yes or no? Do we want to sign out by mail with DKIM? Yes or no? Now I appreciate you may, if you're not technical, you won't necessarily know what those terms mean, but it gives you an idea of what the policies are like. You just turn things on and off for most of them. So pretty straightforward. Something else we can do, a common question that we get asked is, what about continuity? So if I go to continuity from the menu here under services, I can then create a new continuity event. I should give it a meaningful name and description, of course. I can say which users this applies to, so it could be to everybody. It could be to a particular group in Active Directory. It could be based on particular attributes in AD. In my case, I've got a group I defined in Mimecast. I can then say, do we allow Outlook continuity? So even if we give the plugin to people, we can choose within Mimecast which features are available and whether the plugin is available to those individuals at all or not. And then we can set the time range. So we could say from now until we tell Mimecast otherwise, be in continuity mode. What that means is directly route email from Mimecast, avoid the primary email service and go straight to the plugin for messages coming inbound, and for outbound, go straight from the plugin in Outlook, straight to Mimecast and out into the internet. And then when you end the continuity event, we of course deduplicate, but we synchronize all the changes so the primary email service sees everything that's happened in the meantime. Another thing that people often ask about is let's track messages. So let's see, I want to find a message that came from my demo user. I'm just picking it at random. Let's see every message, pick a particular date and time range, so let's say for the last year, apply that, hit search, and I don't see any messages. That's interesting. So what have I done here? So that's looking for outbound messages. Okay, I think I've got, okay, I think I didn't apply that properly. Let me just try that again, because it was basically saying right now to right now, which obviously wasn't going to pick up any messages. Let's hit apply. That's strange. Let me just try it with a different date instead. No. Not quite sure what I've got wrong here. Let's try looking back a month. Apply that. Just give this a moment to search. And okay, so here we've got some records. So here's showing, for example, the drone video that I sent a few minutes ago. If we open that up, so we've seen the mail flow, who it went from and to. The message body was blank because I didn't enter anything in there. But we can also see, if you're technical, you'll probably appreciate that we can see everything that actually happened. So I can see the headers, the footers, absolutely everything in the transmission. Did we get a receipt when we sent it, etc., etc. So I don't want to bore you with unnecessary details, but there's a huge amount of capabilities here. I'll just mention archiving briefly. So let's, for example, say let's create a new discovery case. So imagine that Mimecast's been set up to automatically store every message it sees, internal and external. Let's create a new discovery case. So it's obviously not a very meaningful name, but let me just do this anyway. I'll save that, so new case. I then link it to some searches. So I can create some searches. So let's just do a quick search. This is going to be obviously not very meaningful, but given its demo environment, I do tend to use the word text quite a lot, test quite a lot. I can pick a mailbox this applies to, or I could say it's to everybody. Set a date range, and then I would have that search associated, and I would see that in the discovery case. I could then associate the discovery case with any individuals that I chose in the organization. I can also do something called smart tags, which gives them the ability to then view the content of those messages as well. So this has been somewhat of a whistle-stop tour. Probably the last thing I should show you is the reporting. So we can give quite nice management reports in PDF format if you like. I can download these. So let me just look at an example. So here is a standard report of what kind of things have been happening. So hopefully that gives you an idea. One other last thing that I'll show you in the interface before I end the session and hand back to Bytes is targeted threat protection. So I spoke about rewriting URLs. What I can do is I can have what we term managed URLs. For a bit of fun, and I have no bias against Apple. In fact, I quite fancy one of the watches that they announced a couple of days ago. I chose to make apple.com a blocked address. And the impact of that is we rewrite the URLs anyway, and then when the user clicks on the link, they'll find that that's a blocked address, and they'll be told they can't go there. Now, of course, Apple isn't a dangerous address. This was just only just an example. But equally, Mimecast keeps a list of dangerous addresses, and we constantly research that. You can, of course, choose to give an override and make sure some addresses are always allowed. We can create a TTP policy. So let's just quickly show you how you do that. So I'd give it a narrative, just a description. I would say how aggressive I want the checking to be. I'd then say who it applies to and the standard way that I've shown you for many of the other policies. I'd save that, and that would be it. We then have spear phishing protection active and all good to go. So that's Mimecast. Hopefully that's given you a good idea of our capabilities. Customers typically use a subset, so they may start with just archiving, just continuity, or just security, and even in those areas use a subset of the capabilities. And then often customers find that they're getting such value that they then want to, when they come up for renewal for rival technologies they already have, typically then migrate from those. Of course, some customers just stay in one area. So that's the end of the session. Thanks for your time. I hope you found this useful. If you've got questions, please feel free to share them with Bytes, and feel free to share them with myself as well, copying Bytes. Okay, thanks for your time, everybody.
Thanks very much, Steve.
No worries. How was that?
Good, yeah, really good, thank you. We've just got a question from one of our listeners this morning. If you've got some time, we'll just quickly go through it. So, is it possible to permit SMTP relaying from scanners, etc., while using Office 365 and Mimecast?
That's a really good question. It's quite a techie question, so I appreciate it won't work for everyone listening, but yeah, absolutely. So you can configure any exceptions you like. You can have multiple domains being served by 365 or on-premises Exchange, and you simply configure Mimecast to have those as allowable. So if you're doing SMTP-based scanning, you just put that domain in there, or a particular IP, a particular machine. So yeah, absolutely, and we'd fully audit those activities as well.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Cool.
So I think that's all we have time for, but thanks very much, Steve. And listeners, if you do have any questions, please feel free to contact myself, helen.murphy@bytes.co.uk, or Steve on his contact details on his previous slides.
Helen, thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.